Deep in central Florida lies a wilderness older than highways, older than subdivisions, older than memory. The green swamp stretches across thousands of acres, flat, flooded, and stubbornly wild. Beneath its canopy of cypress and oak, the past is not buried. It waits. Somewhere along a sandy trail, barely noticeable to modern hikers, rests the remains of a homestead, and the story of two settlers whose lives ended in violence more than a century ago. This is the story of Isham and Sarah Stewart. Isham Stewart was born around 1860, during a turbulent period in American history. Records suggest he spent much of his early life working with livestock, particularly horses in rural Florida. He was described as quiet, self-reliant, and deliberate in his habits. By middle age, Isham had chosen a demanding existence. Rather than settle near a town, he claimed land deep within what would later be known as the Green Swamp. Life there required endurance. Summers suffocated the air with humidity. Mosquitoes gathered in thick clouds. Seasonal rains flooded low ground without warning. Yet, Isham stayed. Sarah, also known as Sallie, had already lived a full chapter before joining Isham. Older than her husband by more than a decade, she had already had children from a previous marriage. Her grandson, Josh Browning, would later become central to the darkest moment of this narrative. Those who study regional accounts describe Sarah as steady and practical, a woman familiar with hardship. Frontier living demanded versatility. She cooked over fire, preserved food, tended gardens, and helped manage the property alongside her husband. Together, they built a modest cabin from local timber. It was not grand. It did not need to be. It represented independence. Daily life revolved around work. Isham cared for animals and handled trade when necessary. Trips into town were infrequent but essential. Supplies required long travel by wagon or horseback. The couple reportedly did not trust banks. At some point before their death, Isham took out a sizable sum, around $1,500. In 1918, that amount equaled a small fortune today. On May 9, 1918, Browning and a companion named John Tucker arrived at the cabin. According to later court accounts, the visit appeared ordinary. Dinner was shared, conversation was held without alarm. Night settled over the swamp. At some point after Isham and Sarah went to sleep, violence erupted. Investigators would later determine that both were struck in the head with an axe while in bed. The attack was swift and brutal. Because of the property's seclusion, their bodies were not discovered immediately. Days passed. When authorities finally arrived, the scene bore signs of exposure and delay. The crime stunned the surrounding region. Suspicion quickly focused on Browning and Tucker. The missing money provided motive. Reports indicate that Browning eventually confessed involvement, pleading guilty to second-degree murder. He received a 20-year sentence, 10 years for each victim. Tucker was also charged, though historical records vary in detail regarding the outcome of his case. The brutality of the killings contrasted sharply with the simplicity of the victims' lives. For many, the most disturbing element was not the theft. It was the family connection. Sarah's own grandson stood accused of ending her life. Browning was sent to the state penitentiary at Rayford. Years passed. At one point, he escaped custody. He was later recaptured. Then, in a twist that complicated public perception of justice, procedural issues emerged regarding his original plea. Court documentation suggests he had not been properly informed of his rights. In 1938, roughly 2 decades after the murders, Browning was released. For some, the legal outcome felt incomplete. For others, it reflected the evolving standards of due process during that era. The swamp, however, remained unchanged. Time erased the cabin. Fire and decay consumed its structure long ago. Only fragments of foundation and scattered debris once hinted at where walls had stood. Today, a modest headstone marks the burial site of Isham and Sarah Stewart along a trail maintained within the Green Swamp Wilderness Preserve. Visitors often arrive unaware of the history beneath their feet. The forest hums with insects. Wind moves through branches. Water reflects the sky. The land shows no visible scar from 1918. The Stewart Homestead represents more than a crime scene. It reflects the fragility of frontier existence. More than a century later, the Green Swamp still breathes as it usually has, indifferent to human conflict, patient in its reclamation of wood and stone. Yet for those who walk the narrow trail and pause beside the grave marker, memory lingers. 2 settlers once built a home here, and the forest remembers.